The other watchers stood in silent observation, witnessing the fall of what the humans, placed in their charge by pure chance, had called Alderaan. None of them were truly present. Their existence was not limited by time or place in such a fashion, nor was their true form that of the cowed diminutive by which they visited this corporeal dimension, even when unobserved. They were creatures of ritual and habit, not unlike the human culture that, through infrequent intervention, they had incidentally cultivated over 15,000 years. Not that one span of time occurred to them as being greater or lesser than any other.
If you are a Dark Angels fan, chances are you have seen these little fellas wandering around next to some of your favourite heroes, whether it be in the books or the tabletop. Yes, they look like Jawas. However, they have absolutely nothing in common with those little sand dwellers from Star Wars. They are considerably more terrifying. Should you decide to do so, pissing off a watcher in the dark may actually be one of the last things you ever do. They may have started off as strange little Star Wars-inspired mascots to the Dark Angels, but throughout the lore, they have been hinted at being some of the most powerful creatures and beings within the 40k universe. Possibly the most powerful. And I'm going to tell you why. Better yet, I'm going to tell you what they are. So, without further ado, let us begin.
A figure stepped from the darkness of the trees. It was no more than a few feet in height, and swathed from head to foot in a hooded Hessian robe that obscured every inch of its flesh. The darkness beneath its hood was more complete than that which surrounded Zabriel, and he had the conviction that were he to see the truth of what lay beneath its cowl, he would be driven irrevocably mad. Its hands were clasped before it, each sunken into the opposite sleeve. Its posture was servile, though Zabriel detected no civility in its demeanor. The Watchers in the Dark, like many things in the 40k universe, are an ongoing mystery, and, unfortunately, we don't have much information on them. There are a few things, however, that we do know. They are seemingly native to the deaf world of Caliban, the home of the First Legion and Primarch son of the Emperor, Lion L. Johnson. The Watchers have been inhabiting this planet from before the arrival of humanity before the coming of Old Night. Even on a world full of the great beasts, chaos-infused monsters that feast upon the human inhabitants of the planet, the Watchers in the Dark are considered dangerous, yet at the same time revered by the people of the planet, often considered as protectors and guides, despite never really being seen. They have a vested interest in assisting the Dark Angels since their inception on Caliban, with the arrival of the Emperor, and having been strong supporters of the Lion, especially during the Horus Heresy, with Lionel Johnson being a mostly reserved character, keeping much of his youth to himself. It is speculated that he could have been roaming the dense forest world for almost 100 years before Luther found him. During that time, and with the Lion's highly unique presence and possible warp god soul, it would not be surprising to learn that one day the Watchers in the Dark had been in contact with the young Primarch long before we were even aware, not only in aiding in his growth, but also essentially building a bridge of trust between the Watchers and humanity from an early stage. They spent thousands of years, possibly even millions of years, on Caliban due to it being the hiding place of the Old One's artifact known as the Ouroboros. The Ouroboros is a unique warp device that is part of a set of 3. When brought together with its sister devices, it can essentially create a webway, which leads to another device, which then leads to another device. For Vashdor, this is like the 40k version of the Onyxia attunement quest in World of Warcraft, but that is a whole other story. The Watchers are acting as guardians or jailers of this technology, and though they are very supportive of the Dark Angels, it could really just be a happy coincidence that they all ended up on the same planet. Though with 40k that often doesn't seem to be the case. Perhaps the reason the line ended up on Caliban was because the Ouroboros was there. With all this in mind, the Watchers actively sought the destruction of Caliban, likely in the hopes that the Ouroboros would be destroyed in the process. I can only imagine that is due to the artifact's leaning into a chaos-corrupted nature, and how it can be used to lead chaos, specifically Vashtor at this time, to an Old One's weapon that could very well spell doom for the galaxy, and the birth of a fifth old god. The Watchers in the Dark briefly mention by name Eldrad Ulfran. Now, whether this is due to being acquaintances of the Eldar or just knowing of him is unknown, but it certainly adds to their mystery. And if they know the going-ons of someone like Eldrad, they likely have a connection with the Cabal. Well, had a connection with the Cabal, though likely never in support of their plan to have Horus win the Civil War, as they were very much in support of humanity surviving and even combating chaos. Now, these aren't the only powerful connections the Watchers in the Dark have. They are also most definitely allied with the Emperor himself. When the Lion awakens after his 10,000-year slumber, it is the Watchers that tell him of the old king on the river, who is being watched by 4 shadows, and it doesn't take much convincing to think that this is the Emperor. They also tell the Lion when he should enter the domed chamber within Mirror Caliban, which contains the shield of the Emperor, as well as a vision from his father. The Emperor, in his seemingly weakened state, is apparently getting assistance from the Watchers in order to help him guide his sons through his reawakening, as well as his psychic awakening. With all that said, I should also mention that for the last 10,000 years they have been responsible for hiding and looking after Lionel Johnson in the Rock, while he lay comatose after his fight with Luther. Even with how little information we get on the Watchers in the Dark, they are obviously major players in the setting. The Watchers are extremely psychically gifted, as well as being immune to literally everything. However, they do not actively fight. Noted as being extra-dimensional beings, the forms we see of them aren't actually their real-life forms or bodies. They are simply avatars of something else, something incredibly powerful and dangerous. Dark Angels have been warned not to interfere with them, and it has been rumoured that those who do simply disappear. At one point during the Wrath of Magnus, the Changeling, a powerful demon of Tzeentch in its own right, legitimately fled in terror when it came across a Watcher in the Dark, considering it an anathema to itself and kind. Simply put, the Watchers are not to be fucked with. I watched as the First Ones encouraged the younger races to reach further into the other realm, and with their vibrant minds and passionate souls create beings of power to fight the Star Gods. But the battle was long, and the First Ones were now few, and as their numbers dwindled, so too did their influence over their young creations. Without the wisdom and the might of the First Ones to bind them, I saw the Eldar's war beings evolve from sentient weapons into living gods, the first true gods of the Immaterium. How I wept when the Eldar embraced them as such. The Old Ones are thought to be the very first sentient and spacefaring species of the galaxy, and so because of this, took upon themselves the mantle of responsibility. They studied and became masters of reality as we know it, as well as the warp itself, being the creators of the webway, as well as the Eldar that use it, and the Krorks, the much larger and smarter ancestors of the Orcs. Among many of the species in the galaxy, they are also believed to be the creators of humanity itself. Though said to be an incredibly powerful race, it is unknown if the Old Ones are powerful as individuals or purely as a species itself. For even with their great power and influence over the galaxy, they were still pushed to extinction by the Necrons and their Catan gods during the war in heaven. Leaving behind their creations to rule the galaxy, the Eldar were the ones to carry on their responsibility, which, as we know, didn't really go that well. I don't know exactly what happened to the Old Ones, whether they were wiped out, went into hiding, or fled the galaxy entirely. There have been many theories, though unfortunately without much to back them up. We also don't actually know what they look like either. They are often depicted as a reptilian-type species and have been compared to the Old Ones that the Lizardmen worship in Warhammer Fantasy, though Games Workshop haven't really addressed whether this is true or not, and seem to want to distance the two settings as much as they share similarities.
So, do I really think that Watchers in the Dark are Old Ones? Well, kind of. Okay, let's go over how I see all of this connecting.
The Watchers in the Dark are very likely beings of the warp, possibly warp gods of some kind that oppose chaos. Their guardianship and jailing of the Ouroboros, the Old One relic, is the thing that really made me wonder. This thing has been at the centre of Caliban for millions of years, more likely than not since the War in Heaven. During that time, the Old Ones were certainly still around, and it would seem odd that the Watchers in the Dark would just randomly stumble upon this thing and take it up onto themselves to just commit their entire existence to keeping it locked away. And I do really mean their entire existence. There are no known sightings of Watchers anywhere else in the galaxy other than on Caliban and currently the Rock, with the only exception being in the tabletop when they accompany the Dark Angels into battle. I can't actually find any evidence of them being seen with the Dark Angels in the books that isn't on the Rock, so if anyone has any examples, feel free to let me know in the comments. But, as far as I'm aware, the Watchers in the Dark are exclusively orbiting the Ouroboros and have been for an extremely long time. Though, with it in the hands of Vashdor, I'm sure they are content to just keep hanging around with their super soldier friends. The Old Ones fled the galaxy after the War in Heaven, and they took a vow of inaction. Having failed to hold the mantle of responsibility before, they decided that they could no longer bear that weight, leaving the galaxy's fate into the hands of the races they created, for better or worse. It has also been speculated that the Old Ones were more creators over anything else, so avoiding fights directly, much like the Watchers in the Dark. So, what if the Old Ones didn't leave? At least, not all of them. What would happen if some of them simply stayed behind and guarded one of their relics? A set of Old One scientists perhaps that felt they could not just abandon the galaxy, yet, at the same time, decided to just sit back and watch. The Watchers in the Dark on Caliban could very well be remnants of the Old Ones, having either stayed hidden on Caliban with the Ouroboros for millions of years, or, my theory, as descendants of the Old Ones, still incredibly powerful, but maintaining that vow of inaction as their forebearers. Though, now with the rising of the Emperor and the meeting of the Lion, they may have decided to take a small yet important role in the shaping of the galaxy again. It is thought that mankind was a creation of the Old Ones, and so perhaps they see a paternal-like responsibility to their children. Maybe they see in the Lion something about humanity worth supporting, seeing in him a hope that could combat chaos, and since then have been in contact with the Emperor, offering aid where they can. Still Old Ones through heritage, but, after tens of millions of years, essentially de-evolved into somewhat weaker, much less active observers of the galaxy. The Watchers in the Dark.
What do you guys think? Could they actually be descendants of Old Ones? Are they simply just random warp entities playing 4D chess? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. One thing is for sure though, the Watchers in the Dark are major players within the 40k setting, despite their lack of lore. They are responsible for some of the biggest game-changing events within the galaxy since the return of Gulliman, bringing back Lion L. Johnson, a top contender for one of the greatest sons of the Emperor of mankind. Like the video if you liked it, share, comment and subscribe to help the channel grow, and I'll see you in the next video.
Let's feed the algorithm gods.
Ta for now.